So this is some feedback on the subsidy question. So people have asked for some ideas on this one. So firstly, just looking at the criteria and reminding you what these kind of evaluation type questions are after. We do know a couple of things. We do know that to get into this top band of a 4, if you want a 13 out of 15 marks, you need to be hitting most of these points here, or actually all of these points. And so the things that stand out as different from the ones above are these ones. So where appropriate, examples are used effectively. So that means that you've got sort of genuine examples that support, enhance your writing, and also maybe give you good evidence to justify. The second thing we're looking for is there's really appropriate evidence of synthesis, which means that you've broadly understood, you've broadly discussed the ideas in a balanced way, or evaluation. So for this question, we're looking for ability to consider critically the different possible policy options. So by critically, it could think about, well, do you mean by like short run, long run implications? You think about stakeholders and what implications might be to those types of people. Consider things like the opportunity cost, and also explaining the idea of context. So like how applicable is the solution you're talking about to the given example? So you might be talking about like advertising, and maybe how effective might that be for youth, for instance. So now looking at the student's actual essay. So it's kind of the first point is you expect, for these types of questions, you expect a really good definition at the start. So this student here is talking about subsidies, is the idea at the top, and trying to define what they mean in terms of cost of production at the top. And then connecting that idea to merit goods. And so we're expecting that kind of structure to start with. And then obviously a diagram to explain it. And then this part here is essentially the analysis of the diagram. So far they haven't really done any evaluation. So far it's explaining the question clearly. It's supporting, it's the supporting diagram for that part there. And then in this case, a kind of little bit of feedback was around, could you illustrate the size of the subsidy, and just being really clear that that's the amount of the cost for the government, for instance. So then what happens next for this student is they're going through the different alternatives. So, and that's kind of the way to tackle it. So how do you discuss, you're kind of trying to think, well, subsidies and the different pros and cons of subsidies. But essentially, you're also going to think about all the different alternatives. So you've got your so if you weren't going to subsidise something for merit goods, how else would you encourage people to buy more merit goods? So those are the three things that the student talked about. So advertising is one of the options that you could talk about. So if you read this precisely, it's very good, and it talks about the positive aspects of subsidies. It could advertise. You can advertise healthcare or medicine, so there's an attempt to bring in examples. Eco-friendly technology was an example being used there. But it's not terribly critical, so it doesn't kind of talk about maybe subsidies advertising isn't the most effective if it's really expensive, or it might not be most expensive in the long run, in the short run to change consumer behaviour, or maybe behaviours that can't actually change. So then the second one that the student talked about for the second example was looking at different kind of legislation, laws to change how governments might do things. And then this was really a good example of how they used examples. So this student brought up examples of vaccinations, dentist buses in Singapore as being ways that governments could do this. And then a really nice conclusion and judgment at the end to make a point. I think overall, though, I think it feels that it needed another possible alternative option. And so that's the idea where governments might do. So you've got regulations, and the governments might provide them as public goods, for instance, as being a way to do that. So I think so I was thinking about the criteria for the student. I think hopefully that points out that the evaluation is this kind of the need for critical thinking, not just talking about how subsidies are great. It's a lot more sort of depth and the pros and the cons to do with that. And then really, examples are really good to show that demonstrate your depth of knowledge. And then we're kind of expecting actually that these ones, questions, terms, are actually covered previously and are part of the sort of introduction to the essay. So I hope that kind of helps with your analysis.